Hi, I'm Dom and Roland. Welcome to my studio. I'm going to show you a track that I started at home on my laptop. I'm going to start fiddling around with it, trying to get it sounding a bit further on than it was before. No way at the stage where I'm ready to mix down yet, but I've noticed with a lot of these videos that they focus primarily on really quite advanced techniques. And I wanted to try and just show you sort of a bit of faffing about in the studio, really. So I'll try and show you a bit about how I develop a track from the original loop idea. I'll try and include a bit of how I get from one section to another, and I'll show you a bit of processing. Obviously there'll be a lot of Reaper specific stuff because that's the DAW that I use. But I think a lot of people have a problem with getting from a basic loop to a finished track, and I think most of that is a case of getting a basic rough idea of how you want your track to sound and just going for it, and not focusing too much and trying to hone every sound to perfection before you start arranging your track, because by the time you get around to doing that you'll be totally bored of everything. So I think it's best to get things in the ballpark and then start spanning it out as quickly as possible, which is what I've done here. And then you can start picking away at little bits and going, right, I'm going to process this bit because this feels exciting at the moment. And I suppose the whole thing is about trying to keep the excitement alive for you as an artist while you're being creative, so that by the time you finish the track and people are listening to it, it sounds exciting to them as well. So we've got a track that I've made at home on my laptop. I haven't been in the studio for a few months as I've been taking a bit of a break from having just done my album on Metalheads. But the time has come for me to do another single, get something else out there. So for sitting at home on my sofa on my laptop, I've come up with this little ditty. There's no plugins on it really yet. The way I tend to work is I tend to do all the creative stuff first and then mix down at the end. So I at least know where I'm going before I get too bogged down with mix down stuff. So yeah, well, let's have a little listen to what we've got so far. Starts off with a little piano-y thing. I was watching something on telly and I heard this, and as you can see, it's not actually the way it was when it was played. I've rearranged some of the notes and made my own loops, and so I've continued some of these bits on. There's a fair amount of noise in there as well, which I quite like, because I think it adds to the vibe. There's some clicks in there, but I can get rid of those quite easily. And then from there I thought we'd go into this sort of big dramatic Metalheadsy sort of sounding, don't know what you call that really, it's sort of bass. Again, these are all samples. I tend to always try and use samples rather than soft synths because I think they sound better to me. I think a lot of modern soft synths sound a bit sort of modern and digital, not very warm. They all use the same sort of mathematics in their engines, and they all sort of have the similar tone, whereas things that have been sampled, to me, they've obviously been through different pieces of equipment, different desks. They all sound a little bit different, so you get a much more of a vivid colour, I think, when you use samples. That's just me, I suppose. It's the way I grew up making music. I tend to work in mono, nearly right up until the end of my mix, because this is ultimately club music, and I think things should work in a mono situation, and it should be exciting whether you listen to it on a speaker in your kitchen out of a little single speaker boogie box or whatever. So yeah, I don't think stereo should be relied upon as to create the excitement in your mix. So if something's exciting in mono, then putting it into stereo is only going to make it more exciting. And it doesn't mean I actually get sounds and make them mono. I'll just listen to them in mono, and then when it comes to mix time, I'll see what I've got stereo-wise to work with. And either get rid of the stereo content and make my own for it, or narrow it down. So then I'm in far more control of how it all works. So I think I'm going to start with this intro bit with these piano sort of sounds. Just make sure there's no clicks in there. As you've probably noticed, I use Reaper. I used to use Logic for years, but I started to find it a little bit backwards in terms of their the way you couldn't bounce 32-bit files, various other aspects of it. I found that quite often bouncing to 24-bit loses some sort of mojo. That quite often, because everything runs at 32-bit float, by going down to 24-bit you're adding dither, and that sometimes interferes with the delicate balance of the track. So I'm going to load up my favourite EQ. It's my bread and butter EQ. I helped make this EQ what it is today, not in terms of the coding, but I had a lot of input with the guy that made it, Dave, and it's basically the EQ that I always wanted. It's got does lots of things that other EQs before it didn't do. I know a lot of people use the Fab Filter one, but I think this is much better. There's a fair amount of rumble in that. So I think because I've got various different tracks here, we're going to make a bus. Now in Reaper it's as easy as just clicking this button here. And these two are now going through this here, which I'm going to put another EQ on. And before, I think I'll use a high pass filter on here. I sometimes try and avoid high pass filters because they cause a lot of phase issues when it comes later in the track, especially if you've already got something, you've already constructed the track. Adding a high pass to something when you've already got the vibe going quite often changes the way the phase of the different tracks interacts with each other. So in that case, I'll often use a low shelf. I suppose you can see it on here because there's a phase diagram. You can see, for instance, that's the phase difference by using a low cut. And if I go and change that to a low shelf, sort of at the same, sort of cutting out the same sort of thing, get rid of the high pass, you can see how the phase is different. So the phase isn't actually affecting the real bottom end anymore. Whereas if I switch that out and put that in, you can see that there's a very big difference in phase. I mean, this also has a thing called free phase, where I can move the phase back. But that's getting very deep with this EQ. Most people wouldn't do that. The free phase mode does introduce pre-ringing, so it's not always something you'd want to use. I found the best overall mode in this EQ for me is the zero latency analog, which has no pre-ring, obviously, because it's not a linear phase EQ. And I suppose it only using it in free phase only introduces pre-ringing if you start linearizing your bands, I suppose. I'm not technical enough to know the ins and outs of it, really. You'd have to ask one of my colleagues like Noisia, something like that. Okay, so yeah, we'll go back to using this low cut. So I'm just trying to get rid of that rumble, which is about there, I'd say. I know many people would probably do it higher. I quite often use a 6 dB or 12 dB slope, because 6 dB is the most natural sounding to me. In this case, I'm going to use a 12. And what I'm also listening to is whether I can still hear the depth in the sound. The reason I chose this sound in the first place is because it pulled me in. And I think when you EQ something and you're getting rid of the tops or the part of the sound that you think isn't going to work in terms of a mix, it's important for me to still have that 3D depth in there. And quite often if you low cut something, it does tend to get rid of that somewhat. But I think we're all right with this. So now I'm going to listen through, see if there's any clicks. I've already done crossfades on some of these things. Like, that sounds all right to me. Now there was a bit of a sort of flammy thing going on there, so we could, oh yeah, there's no fade there. It's probably better if we do it a crossfade, actually. Alright, got that. And then we'll just copy that out to be the same, so I get rid of all that. So I think that'll do in terms of up until I decide to mix that down, in terms of the rest of the creation of the track. I think I probably add a string part to that. Maybe we'll just try playing one in just to make it a bit more interesting. So I'm going to use my favourite string machine, which is Omnisphere. String. Right, so that's not working. That's MIDI input. Bit of a duff note there. All right, so I'll go in and take out that duff note. I thought that one could have been a bit earlier. So move that there and leave that there for vibe's sake. Right, let's go on to these beats. I've got this sound and I got this off the telly again. And I loved the sound of the sort of the stab, I suppose. So I got it to here. I'll zoom in. With Reaper, I can actually move this internal thing around, so I don't actually have to go into a separate editor to do the start point, which is great. So I get that there. That looks like a good zero crossing. Now, what's great about this is I can, if I hold down my alternate key, I can pretty much go up and down in tone, and it works the same way as a sampler does with sample rate conversion, because I'm using Reaper's live sample rate conversion. So if I go up in tone, obviously it gets shorter, and down it gets longer. I can also, if you look up here, well, actually I can't zoom in on that bit, but I can also do it in sense as well. So I can go up and down. Go back to where I was. So anyway, I've to do that, and then I've made this little riff by using that functionality. You can see this pitch is down a little bit here, and I think I pitched it down about 40 cents. To create that little riff. probably have a bit of a look at the EQ on that as well. Again, there's a lot of low end that doesn't need to be there. You can see the fundamental is this one coming down here. So I'm going to try and chop just below that. It's probably lacking a bit of top end, and there's probably a bit too much boominess as well. Yeah, something a bit better. All right, let's go back to the beats. So I've got two lots of beats here. This is a break that you'll all recognise. It's the rotary connection, life could break. And again, I've done what I did with the other basses. With the basses, it's obviously it's at this pitch normally. And I decided the loop that I wanted, which was that. I got the beginning of the start point here, and I put it on the first bar, on the front of the bar. Then obviously it would have been too long at the pitch, because I want my track to be at 172 beats per minute. So this is obviously way too long. All right, solo that. So I want that to be this length. So what I did was I found the end point before the next hit, and then I just pitched it up until it looked about the right size, which is there. Now there's another function in this where I think it would probably be more like that, and what I've done is I held it down and I could actually stretch it out, but that's not stretching it, it's sample rate converting, and it'll snap to the nearest point, which is there. And then I can listen to it, and then obviously if it's not sounding quite right in the loop, I can still, you can hear it's slightly delayed getting back to the first kick as it's looping. So you see that's wrong. And that way I'm keeping the groove of the original beat. Like some of these might not all be spot on. As you can see, this snare is slightly early. This snare is slightly early, but these kicks seem to be on, which is great. So I could either chop that up, but I think it sounds pretty good as it is. It's got a groove. It's making me want to nod my head. So I think we'll keep it like that. I've got another version of it here underneath, and I think all I've done to this is added some fuzz distortion from Reaper's own, one of Reaper's own plugins. It's quite an old sort of, there's not really any real sort of clever analog maths gone into this. It sounds pretty much like an old DAT player would in the 90s when you crunched it, and that's one of the reasons I love it. It's got that sort of old school sound. And that's what we're sort of trying to go for with this. We've also got the Apache break in here as a fill. Now, unfortunately, this was already something from a previous project that I've heavily processed already, much in the same way as probably with this, or probably some of the slate stuff, which I also use a lot. Again, this is just a normal bass noise. Which I can make any riff I like. I mean, I tend not to use samplers for the basic stuff anymore, and just use this up and down key thing, which I've actually programmed in myself using Reaper's action list, which is a very clever list of pretty much anything that you want to do, and you can add your own actions in. You can assign several actions together to make I don't know what it's called, but it's a big action. And I've already set various macros up for things like splitting a beat into transient detected parts, and various other clever little things. Not that I need to do any of that at the moment, but yeah, I set up the macros for I set up the actions for the pitching, and I've also set up Reaper to work in the same way as I used to work with Logic. I used to hold down the command key to zoom in and out, which I found is the best way of navigating around, because I'm used to it, and then I click on blank screen to come back out. And all of this is editable in Reaper. I basically set Reaper up to work exactly the way Logic used to work, which is great. And I mean, if you're bored of the way it looks, you can pretty much change it to anything. I mean, I can make it look like Pro Tools with the touch of a button. It's quite an amazing program. So that's all for now. If you want to see any more, go buy the latest issue of Computer Music.